Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the closing plenary of the ITF 2018 titled Working Together for Safer City Streets. My name is Ali Aslan. I have the great pleasure after yesterday's plenary of also moderating and steering you throughout the final session, the final plenary of this year's ITF. And ladies and gentlemen, this session, of course, will draw on work developed within the ITF Safer City Streets Network, an initiative that supports cities with adopting a safe system approach by sharing data, experiences, and knowledge. And exactly, it's those experiences and that kind of knowledge that we will share here within the next 90 minutes with formidable speakers who have a lot to share from their cities and their organizations with us. And up first, I'm delighted to welcome on stage the Deputy Commissioner for Policy at the NYC Department of Transportation. He also is the founder of the ITDP. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Riploglu.
Hello.
And Michael, NYC, New York has adopted from all accounts and by all criteria a successful Vision Zero initiative. A lot of people are asking how. How did you do it?
Well, I think it took political leadership by Mayor Bill de Blasio, who ran on a campaign promise of Vision Zero, borrowing this idea from Sweden, which is now spread to dozens of countries and many, many cities around the world. And we began that campaign by looking closely at the data, where people are killed and seriously injured, by going out to communities and understanding from residents where they felt unsafe in the traffic system, designating priority corridors, and targeting those for key investments to make streets and intersections safer for pedestrians and cyclists to move about and cross the street, and investing heavily in safety education, in enhanced enforcement. And we also went to the state legislature and got our speed limit lowered from 30 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour citywide. And reducing speed saves lives, better enforcement saves lives, changing the mentality of how people drive, increasing empathy of drivers for vulnerable road users through effective messaging campaigns saves lives. Through all of this, through continued engagement with our communities, we've made a lot of progress.
Yeah, a lot of progress in NYC, and under your leadership as Deputy Commissioner for Policy at the NYC Department of Transportation, of course. How difficult was it to implement those changes, to bring the public on board?
Well, I think we had a strong political impetus from community groups, groups like Transportation Alternatives. There's a coalition of groups called Families for Safer Streets, who represent families who've lost loved ones to traffic violence. And they were very persuasive in going to our state legislature and advocating successfully to lower the speed limit, to increase our authority as a city to use automated speed enforcement cameras. Now, these measures aren't always popular with everyone. There are some motorists who were quite unhappy to get a speeding ticket from an automated camera, but we found this to be a very fair and effective means of enforcement. And after we put in speed cameras, the rate of speed violation drops typically by 75% within a few months. So these are very effective means of helping to bring about a culture of compliance with our traffic laws.
So in a city where everybody is on the run and in a rush, always on the run and in a rush, you manage to tame, at least as far as the streets are concerned, as far as traffic is concerned, you manage to bring a different flow to it.
Well, we still have a long way to go. We still have a couple hundred people a year killed in our traffic system, half of them pedestrians and cyclists, vulnerable traffic users. But we reduced the number of pedestrians killed from, in 2013, we had 183 pedestrians killed on New York streets. Last year, we had 101. So our programs are saving hundreds of lives.
Right. Please, if that merits a round of applause, don't be shy. If that's, we are here We are here to celebrate the success and progress that have been made. Thank you so much, Michael, for now. You will, of course, stay put here with me because we want to hear from another city, how they've coped with it, namely Lisbon in this particular case. And we have the City Council for Mobility and Safety with us, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Miguel Gaspar. Hello, Miguel. Great to have you here from the beautiful city of Lisbon. Of course, we just heard about the success and progress we're seeing in NYC. Tell us about the success and progress that is in place in your city in Lisbon.
Well, I would like to share with you a message of commitment and the effort that message has. Lisbon is a city of 500,000 people. Every day, another 500,000 search the city, so 1 million people per day in the city, which means per year 1 billion trips in the city of Lisbon. Last year, 16 people died in the streets of Lisbon. 9 were pedestrians. If we look to the numbers and try to understand how we compare the other cities, it's irrelevant. It was 16 people too many. So the only right vision that the city can have is a vision zero, because everyone that dies, it's the son of someone, it's the father of someone, the friend of someone, and it's a tragedy for them, for their families, and that's a huge impact on society. And even if you look at it in the perspective of the city, and because also I'm responsible for the bus company and for the police, municipal police, if you are a professional in the public service and you are involved in an accident and someone died, I cannot imagine anything worse in a career. So the only message that we can have is we have to go to vision zero. No death is acceptable. But the point is, if you put it on and that's the commitment of the city, we are strongly committed to the vision zero. But if you put it in perspective, and with the Paris Agreement challenges, when we want to decarbonize, in the city of Lisbon, our objective is to come from 50% of the trips by car to 1/3 by car. So a reduction from half to 1/3. That means a huge increase of vulnerable users, because actually the alternative is public transport, it's cycling, it's active modes, it's to walk. So basically, if we are very successful in the targets of the Paris Agreement, and there cannot be any other way, because otherwise we'll left a bad world for our children, we have to go for it. But it has a huge impact in the cities, which is a strong increase of the vulnerable users. So that means that we have to increase our effort, and that means that we have to do more on safer streets to protect these users, and that means a completely different design of the cities that for too many years were designed by cars, and now we have to design it to people.
And I hear please. And I hear very clear that Lisbon is very much committed to adopting and achieving the Vision Zero approach. Now, Michael, you just heard from Lisbon, and obviously the success story that you shared with us today. What are the lessons here? I mean, at the end of the day, it is about working together for safer city streets. It's about learning from best practice examples. What would you say, for instance, as different as the cities may be? What could Lisbon learn from NYC?
I mean, I think there's a great deal of benefit to be gained by increasing the collaboration across city agencies. We could not have achieved our Vision Zero success without strong cooperation and work with the New York Police Department, with our Municipal Fleet Services Management Agency, which is making our city fleet safer with things like truck guards, side guards, without the cooperation of our Taxi and Limousine Commission. So I think having strong leadership from the top that fosters strong leadership and a demand for reporting on progress every month is something that we've done, and perhaps other cities should focus a lot on this. And then also focusing on how to gain benefits from learning from communities about where people feel unsafe, so that we can work against the culture of aggressive driving and create a culture of compliance with traffic laws.
Miguel, is there a distinct Lisbon approach, if you will, to adopting Vision Zero that perhaps even a city like NYC could benefit from?
I think that more and more there is a group of cities that are working together on the same options. For instance, in Lisbon, we are on the Safer Streets network from the ITF. In Lisbon, we also try to take data-driven decisions, and we bring that perspective here to that group. For instance, we know now for sure, because we have that all that registered, the very positive impact that speed cameras bring to the city. Basically, they were red regions, red hot zones, and now they are green zones. So basically, there is no accidents there. And because we identified those places, use data to solve the problem, invest in that point, and now we have the results. If we show the results, we can motivate other cities if they want to follow this good practice. But I think the one of the most important thing is, while mobility is getting more connected, it's getting more global because global companies are acting in many cities. I think cities also have to join and to target common issues. For instance, bike sharing schemes. Companies like Ofo, Obike, many others are in many cities. One of the most risky aspects of the bike sharing schemes is that you present bicycles to a city to people that don't ride bicycles for many years in their life, and they start riding again. And that's, of course, they do it in a context that is as safe as we can, but there is always a risk factor. If we can share the good practice and identify how can a company global like Ofo, for instance, just to say one, act in one city and they have to act the same way in the other city and find the good practice, I think these kind of forums and participations are key for what we do. Afterwards, what we do in the city of Lisbon, I guess, it's for the best practice. I can speak a bit about that. But I think this collaboration is one of the most important things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think both of our cities are part of the Safer Streets network, which is funded by the FIA Foundation, and I think that is helping us to share good data and best practice with each other. I think what we found is that Vision Zero success needs to be supported by a strong foundation of data analysis to understand where the real problems are and how we can develop effective solutions to safety challenges.
So you see a clear benefit of the ITF Safer City Streets network?
Most definitely.
How about you, Miguel? Do you profit as the City Council for Mobility and Safety of Lisbon? How do you profit from the Safer City Streets network?
No, again, we have different kinds of limited resources. As a politician, the most limited resources that we have is time. So actually, to understand what others are doing well and being able to apply that to our city actually accelerates the program, accelerates the actions. Someone said in the one session, so we have Vision Zero, now we have to have Strategy Zero. I would say now we have to have Action Zero. So I guess, and find the right actions in networks like Safer Streets actually let us choose the decisions that we expect to have a faster impact in the city, and for that these forums are key.
And it's clear that both of you have emphasized repeatedly how crucial a cooperation is here, how crucial the exchange of experiences are.
Yeah, and I think we recognize in New York, and I think Lisbon recognizes this as well, that there are strong linkages between creating a safer traffic culture and advancing progress on environmental and greenhouse gas reduction goals. As Miguel said, I think Lisbon has mode share targets. New York does as well. We currently have 2/3 of all trips in New York City by walking, cycling, and public transport. We aspire to move that to 80% by 2050 as part of meeting our 80 by 50 reduction goals for greenhouse gases.
Still, a lot of work has been done, is being done, and probably still remains to be done as far as cooperation, international cooperation is concerned, and exchanging those data, ladies and gentlemen. We just heard from two representatives from two cities that have been very successful and ambitious in implementing the Vision Zero strategy, Michael Replogle and, of course, Miguel Gaspar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, we had representatives from the United States, from Portugal. Now we're going to change continents. We're going to Chile, and there I'm extremely delighted to welcome now on stage the Minister of Transport and Telecommunications of Chile, Gloria Hood Hesse, ladies and gentlemen, is here with us. Please. Lovely to have you here with us, and You have carefully and intently listened to your colleagues, listened to the two gentlemen who came before you. My question to you, of course, is also your country. How has your country committed itself to adopting and rather creating safer city streets?
Well, I will not get any applause because our country belongs to OECD, but we are in the last position in terms of fatalities by 1,000 inhabitants. So we have an extremely high challenge. And this is very inspiring to hear what other countries have done. In our vision, we defined our policy. We see that cities become every time more dense and full of people. Houses are smaller, so our life will happen every time more in the street. And pedestrians and cyclists were not considered. For example, when you develop real estate planning, the regulation only required solutions for cars. So we are including pedestrians and cyclists now. But we are also reducing the speeds in urban areas. The law was approved last week. That implies that we have to improve our enforcement as well. So we are going with another law in the parliament that will support the operation of technology, of cameras along the city to control and enforce speed. We think that speed is one of the major issues that we have to control. Is in the back of most of the fatalities. Almost 30% of people who die is related to high speed. And the other thing is allocating the public space. As I said, public space will be a limited resource in many cities, and we have to define who will use it. So we are allocating part of the space, of the road space, to cars, every time less. And then what we are doing is to reduce the width of car lanes in some roads, and then to open space for cyclists. And cyclists cannot use the pedestrian areas. So we also protect pedestrians in their own space. I think that developing each mode with their own infrastructure, but harmonizing the uses will help significantly. I hope that in other sessions we will be invited and we have better results.
Yeah, and it seems you just mentioned that the record of your country has not been up to par.
No.
There's a lot of space and room for improvement.
Yeah, and it amazes me how all the safety measures need enforcement. If you see, all the behavioral change towards safety is the result of enforcement, of law. It's not the personal attitude of self-protection. And I think it's amazing, because it should be very, very spontaneous to protect ourselves, but it does not. So I am now decided to put all the rules and put things in order, because we are saving lives. And the other thing, just a small comment. I also think that we have to send the correct messages. And if I recall, this could be hard to say, but when the Minister of Finances is appointed, the search goes to the best professionals in the country, and very well-known economists and a very solid background. But when you appoint the person in charge of safety, the search is not that strict. So if we raise the level of the person in charge and we commit from the highest level to this objective, I think that we can get changes.
So we need to place a greater emphasis on
Absolutely.
also the quality of the personnel.
Yeah, because if you see how much effort is set on increasing the GDP, which is important. We live from the economy. But saving lives is not a discussion at the same level in the public stage.
Thank you so much for your bluntness, your honesty today about speaking about the situation in your country. Please remain here with me, but you will be joined now by the Minister for Women. She's also the Associate Minister for Transport and Associate Minister for Health in New Zealand. Julianne Genter, ladies and gentlemen, is here. Pleasure to have you.
We are 4 in the stage.
I'm sorry?
We are 4 in the stage.
Yes, indeed.
3.5.
3.5. Well, lovely to have you here with us in Leipzig. And of course, the question also goes to you, New Zealand. As far as your country's approach, you are the Associate Minister for Transport. What policies have you implemented and kicked off to make New Zealand streets safer?
Good morning to everyone. I have to say that New Zealand is a bit at the beginning of a journey on Vision Zero and safety, because we only recently had a change of government and we're taking a very different approach to transport policy. So we're not quite as bad. We're not last in the OECD. But in the last 5 years, deaths and serious injuries on our roads have been increasing at a much higher rate than traffic has been increasing. Now, we have had an increase in population and traffic, but there was just a story in the New Zealand Herald today about a shocking safety audit report of Auckland and their safety record, our largest city, saying that deaths and serious injuries have increased 5 times faster than traffic over the last 5 years. So while we have reduced car dependence somewhat, increased public transport, walking and cycling, we still have been increasing deaths and serious injuries. And so it's a bit of a test case. Why did this happen? At the same time, we had a reduction in the amount of road policing enforcement. We have safety cameras. I've been calling them safety cameras instead of speed cameras. We have speed cameras in the city, but in fact, they haven't been enforced. They haven't been producing infringement notices. And we still have an approach to traffic engineering, where although we had since 2010 a safer systems approach in theory in the strategy at a central government level and at the local level, it has not flown through to actual policy changes and how we prioritize the infrastructure. So if there's a trade-off between changes to an intersection where we might put in protection for bicyclists or priority for pedestrians, if there was a reduction in level of service for vehicles, the people were choosing the level of service for vehicles instead, and saying, oh, we have a safer systems approach. But so the new government, we have made safety a major priority in our government policy statement. We want to be increasing the number of people walking, cycling, and taking public transport in our towns and cities. We know that when it comes to implementing this on the local level, it will be politically challenging, as it is in every other city. Anytime you want to reallocate road space away from cars and storing cars, there's a bit of unhappiness from the locals. But this is what we have to do if we're really committed to improving safety and at the same time achieving our goals in terms of reducing pollution and carbon emissions, improving health. So I would say in New Zealand, I want to come back in a few years and tell you how quickly we were able to turn this around. I think we know what we need to do. The policies are obvious. Data collection might be a bit of a challenge, but the biggest challenge is simply the political will, particularly at the local level, to make the infrastructure changes in the short term.
You echoed a lot of things that also Michael Reploglis said about NYC in a sense. You got to step on some toes here at the end of the day to get things accomplished.
Well, I think anytime people have had a privilege and, it's harder to give that up for them. So we know that it's much more efficient to allow the space for people on foot or on bikes or on public transport, but there will be a period of adjustment where people are used to being able to drive their cars easily, park for free, and ultimately that's not going to support the outcomes that most people want for their city, which is one where their kids can walk and cycle to school safely, where you have good outcomes, you don't have traffic congestion, you don't have pollution, So we just need to show leadership in that, and we will need to work together with police, with the local authorities. But New Zealand's a fairly small country. We're almost 5 million people, and ultimately local governments' transport policy and funding is very influenced by the central government policy and funding decisions. So we will be leading from the top and supporting the local authorities to implement the right solutions.
Political leadership is key here. I think you both have reiterated that, and you are both examples on how to exercise that influence and that leadership, of course. So thank you to Julianne Genter for now. You will be with us here, the both of you, because you will be joined now. We went from Chile to New Zealand. Now we come back to Europe, and delighted to have the CEO of the National Transport Authority of Ireland with us, Anne Graham, ladies and gentlemen.
Delighted to be here.
Ireland, also a relatively small country, but
Yes.
with its own set of challenges, I would assume.
Yes, we do have challenges. We're in a particularly different position. We're ranked actually sixth in terms of the ITF's recently published Road Safety Authority report. We have road deaths of 3.3 per 100,000. So that's pretty good position to be in. But we do have a target to go to 2.5 by 2020, and we're working hard to achieve that. We have a multi-agency approach, and we have an independent agency called the Road Safety Authority, and they target all the areas in terms of trying to improve our fatalities in relation to road. So it's been based on education, enforcement and engineering, looking at those three particular areas. But just in terms of our statistics, we have reduced pedestrian deaths by 20% since 2010. But when we look at our city regions, we in last year saw that 8 out of the 30 deaths occurred in the Dublin region, which is our capital city. And while we have been improving our pedestrian areas, reducing speeds, looking at pedestrian-only zones, many engineering kind of aspects of that, we still need to do more. And we've had particular difficulty because we faced a significant economic crisis in recent years, and we haven't been able to put the funding into that infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But now we're in a better place economically, and we need to really gear up in terms of delivery of our infrastructure. In terms of cycling, we also, as a national authority, one of the responsibilities that I have in the National Transport Authority is to encourage a more sustainable use of public transport and sustainable modes. And we have a concern now, as we are encouraging more people to walk and cycle, that we're going to see increases in deaths of vulnerable road users, particularly cyclists. And we've witnessed that now just between last year and this year, where we saw an increase in cyclist deaths, unfortunately, across the state, increased by 50%, albeit from a low number. So that is very concerning, that as the economic activity recovers in our cities, as we see more construction activity, more heavy goods vehicles in our cities, it means that our cyclists are more vulnerable. So we're looking at ways of how we can make our cyclists and walking areas more safe. Mm-hmm. And part of that is looking at the infrastructure, putting in more cycle lanes. As well as that, I have responsibility for public transport and improving the infrastructure for public transport. So we've a program called Bus Connects, where we're going to actually put in place over 200 kilometres of good bus priority measures, bus lanes. They have been sharing the road space with cyclists, but by segregating the cyclists out of the bus lanes, we also hope to improve the environment for cyclists. So while we're in a reasonably good position, we still have ambitions to be better, and we need now to invest fully in terms of making it a much safer place for cyclists and walkers. Ambitious
plans to be even better, but clearly your strategy to reduce traffic fatalities is working, it's successful. If you have the opportunity to share some advice, for instance, with a country that perhaps is not faring too well yet at this particular point, what would that be, as different as those countries might be?
Well, I think it's focusing on every aspect of road safety. safety. As I said, it's not just about the engineering and engineering the roads to be more safe and engineering our cities to be safer, but it's also about education of the road users, education of the vulnerable road users as well, to look after themselves while they're on the road. And then it does mean investment and making sure that you have significant investment and really fighting for that investment for our vulnerable road users.
And clearly the Safe System approach, the Safer City Streets network is something that you all benefit from, that you all see. And at the end of the day, Minister Hood, the network that is being in place, you said that Chile ranks pretty much at the bottom, but the network, how could that be of better use?
I think the best benefit is to put the issue in the political agenda, because that makes it more important, more visible. So we, in general, our country has done very well in many aspects, and we compare positively with the region and in many aspects related to development. But this aspect will be like a shame. So I think that belonging to the network and bringing experience, it has enormous value, but will have an impact on the level of decision, on the concern of the safety, road safety issue in the political agenda.
And the political agenda is, of course, the one you're shaping, Julianne Genter.
What I would really benefit from is information on what are the most effective interventions, but especially, as you mentioned, education, because we have awareness campaigns, and it's not clear to me which ones are really effective, how we could be more effective at influencing driver behavior, how we can even reach more people who are using the roads now that so many people aren't watching television anymore. It's a much more fragmented audience. So how do we effectively get cut through and influence behavior, as well as get buy-in for the infrastructure changes and speed changes that we know need to happen? So I think that would be incredibly useful to be able to learn from other countries what are the most effective interventions and what is the best way to really drive that behavior change.
And Graham, Minister Hood has said, you know, clearly the changes don't seem to come voluntarily. People don't seem to have an innate wish and desire to do what's best for them. So regulation here at the end of the day is, of course, pertinent.
It certainly is. And we have the same issues and still have in terms of allocating road space. It's not unique. You know, we also face those difficulties. And there's still, you know, in terms of particularly the city centre, where you're trying to keep a retail environment alive and you're also trying to, you know, not have as many cars coming in. There is a tension there that always has to be, I suppose, looked at in terms of cities. But it just really does behove on us to encourage those that are invested in the city to also believe that when they have good environment for walking and cycling, it will improve and, you know, it'll boost the investment in their retail activity.
And please.
I wanted to make a comment, because if we promote the improvement of the public space in terms of beautiful places, we will create the critical mass that will force things towards protecting non-motorized modes. So if we provide a convenient environment, not just convenient, but pleasant environment, we will probably have a social force that will push also the decisions towards protecting the use of the city, the intense use of the city in a safer way.
I would expect, I mean, one thing that we are talking about, but we haven't really done yet, is using more trials as part of a consultation process, so that at the moment when we're consulting on changes to the road layout, we, you know, are presenting some drawings and asking for everyone's feedback, and then people are not happy, and you end up with a really compromised design after a long period of time. If we could just go out and make simple changes and reallocate space for 3 months or 6 months and actually collect the data on it, I think we would end up with more buy-in and better outcomes. And this is a lesson we learned from New York, but we have yet to actually implement it, and I think the actual implementation of it will be critical, ensuring that we're doing it in a way that people accept, and we can get that good data.
I might just pick up on education again, because I suppose we probably need to think about who are we trying to educate. We, funded by our Department of Transport, run a programme called Smarter Travel, and we focus on education as well, so particularly starting with primary school, which is our youngest children. And not only are you trying to educate the young people, but also their parents about how they travel and how they use sustainable modes and how they can use them safely, because parents make a decision for their children about how they travel, and we still find that 60% of our primary school children are being driven to school. They don't walk and they don't cycle. So, you know, if you start that behaviour at a very young age, it's very difficult for them to, you know, to change their behaviour later on. So by education at that stage, but you're also educating them how to use the road safely, and educating their parents also in how to use the road safely as well. So that may be something that might be considered.
And to benefit from the Safer City Streets network, of course, it's essential that data is being shared, that knowledge is being shared, that experiences are being shared. How well is that being done at the moment? Do you see room for improvement? Do you see where the cooperation could be even closer? Perhaps want to start, Anne?
Well, I mean, I welcome forums like this, but I mean, I think there are many different forums where cities and governments can share their best practice. So I think, as I said, a forum like this and many more, I think the data is being shared, and the Transport Forum also publish reports that I think are very valuable in terms of how we can benchmark ourselves against other countries.
Yeah, I would say that it's very useful, and one concern is also to be sure that we are comparing the same information, because some countries record the accidents, for example, and fatalities at the moment of the accident. Some also compute those who die from the accident after 24 hours. So I'm not sure that we are all comparing the same thing. And that would be very important. And I would also suggest including in the database and all the follow-up some segmentation to see whether some profiles of people is less safe than others, and also some measures of perception. Not just the objective information, but also to understand how people perceive, because it could happen that people perceive less danger than real, and that may explain also some attitudes. So I think we still have to work on the concept of the data, but sharing information is basic. Because we can set our targets.
Julie?
I think it's excellent to have this forum and the research from the ITF and other forums that are out there. If there's one gap that I slightly saw, it's that we have all this information about the right policies, but so often the policies that get implemented are based on politics, not a rational assessment of the policy that's going to be effective. And some vested interests are very good at going out and doing the PR lobbying for a particular motorway project, say, and winning the support for that, while we've got, academics and technical experts telling us that's not the right thing to do. But really, it's we need to be able to communicate to the public in an effective way that builds support for the changes that we need to make.
Minister Hoots, Minister Genter, and of course, Anne Graham, I think you three are leading by example and are great role models for many women out there, showing that transportation is not just a male issue. So in that sense, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your issue. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and now I am pleased we heard from city representatives, we've heard from ministers, and I'm pleased now to welcome on stage the Secretary General for Mobility of the FIA, Andrew McKellar, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Ali. It's good to be here.
Great to have you. I saw you taking very diligent notes. Share with us what you have observed so far here.
Well, look, I think it's been a great discussion so far, and if I can say, I'm just absolutely impressed to see such a great audience here today. So I think it's very good that there's such interest in this topic, and certainly thank you to the ITF for including this topic in the summit, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from the experience that we're seeing in some of the major cities around the world, and I think it was particularly gratifying to hear the experience that they've had in New York with the Vision Zero program there, and congratulations to New York on their Transportation Achievement Award, which I think was announced yesterday, because I think it is a good initiative. They are showing what can be done to change attitudes, to make progress, and it's something that I think a lot of other cities can learn from. We're seeing similar efforts now being made in places like Mexico City. It was great to hear what's being achieved and the commitment in Lisbon, in the other cities around the world, and also what national governments are looking to do. I guess in this discussion, what I would seek to bring is the user perspective. So our organisation ultimately represents not just motorists, but in fact people who are using roads and the transport system. Personally, I work for the Automobile Federation, but I don't own a car. I live in Paris, a city where there are a lot of cars, but there's also the most convenient and easiest way to get around is by public transport or by walking. I think the cultural experience, so we talk about the focus on Vision Zero, on reducing reliance on cars, and then the impact that has on vulnerable users within the system, and I can vouch for that. And living in a city like Paris, what I'm never cease to be shocked that when I go to a pedestrian crossing, when the light changes to go green, how often it is that you will find a car accelerating to get through ahead of the pedestrians crossing, or my wife taking the children to school will find that she's beeped on the green by a car or someone wanting to get through, get across, hurry up, get the kids over the... And I think that's an amazing attitude which has got to be changed in those sorts of cities. Only recently I was in Madrid and I was staggered that the cars actually stopped when I got to the pedestrian crossing. I thought, gosh, what's happening here? I haven't seen this for a little while. So I think that's quite important.
Let's see if you're allowed back into Paris after these statements. Yeah.
So, but I think another thing here I would just say is, just very quickly, is I would bring the perspective of user choice, and I think that's something that we've got to bear in mind. So there's a lot that cities can do, I think, in changing the culture, in improving compliance and enforcement, but I think we have to preserve choice. And I get a little bit nervous when I hear about policies that are about regulating access for vehicles or trying to remove vehicles from the city. I think possibly that's fine, but I think we should make sure that we do so in a way which is not prescribing how people live their lives. Mm-hmm. So by all means, we should seek to come up with policies that internalise negative externalities, find ways to appropriately price our transport systems to encourage users to do the right thing and to reflect or understand the costs that they impose. But let's try and do it in a way where we preserve choice, because people still do want to have the choice around personal transportation, and I think that's an important thing to bear in mind.
And you just pointed out the mentality difference, Paris vis-a-vis Madrid. We talked about New York. We talked about other cities here, Dublin, Lisbon, of course. How do you formulate a cohesive approach to the Safer City Streets network with so many different mentalities out there? How do you formulate that?
Well, I think it's about best practice, and this is why I think case studies like New York are so important, that when people do step up and take the lead, when they do actually confront the culture a little bit, so the issues of having safety cameras or speed cameras in place, ultimately, if it delivers results, I think people understand that it is there. it will benefit them. So if you're not exceeding the speed limit, you won't get a fine. And I think being able to take that step, it can be a challenge at times to gain acceptance, but I think this is where learning from that experience and seeing those cities, those jurisdictions that are prepared to take a lead on those sorts of things is very important. So this is one of the reasons with the FIA, we are strongly supporting the Safer City Streets initiative because that the ITF is leading. Because what we do see with that is that it is bringing together those stakeholders. It's bringing together cities, it's bringing together other organisations that have a stake in this. They are looking at the empirical evidence and they're responding to that, and I think that's a very valuable initiative. So we're very happy to support that, and we will continue to support it over the next 3 years.
That's good to hear. Let's have another person join us here. We have with us the Director for Strategic Business Development at the PTV Group, which is a German company specializing in software solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, Paulo Humanes is here with us. Please give him a hand. Paulo, you're coming, of course, from a bit different perspective here, from the consulting, the technological aspects. You heard your four speakers. How can technology, how can your company support the cities to create safer travels?
Okay, so we basically develop technology and software. So we understand, as it was said before, that if we're going to meet all the targets that we have in terms of the Paris Agreement, we will have more vulnerable road users on the street. We also realize that we are a mix of a revolution in terms of mobility, so we need to understand how those changes will take place. And basically what we want to do is to ensure that all together work as one. I want my children to grow up in a city where they are breathing good, clean air, that they are walking without me having to hold my hand to them every time, and where they efficiently can get from A to B wherever it is that they need to go into the city. That's my aspiration. And what we as PTV are doing is bringing all that together and showcasing that you can actually do it together, but also, and more important, and why we also participate in these initiatives and why we participate also with the ITF, we need to understand what will be done in the future and how we can support with the tools that enable that to take place. Because it's very easy for policy to come up with ideas and then not to have the tools that enable that delivery. So we will hopefully provide some of those tools. And of course, the other thing that we also want is we don't want just to produce one or two reports and tell things. I say that for us, and I say this very much in our company, is our software is a distillation of the knowledge of many, many people. So we want to share that knowledge. We don't want to keep it just for us. So the idea is that we use technology as a platform that enable safety to be considered, because you know, we are very passionate about safety. Safety affects all of us, and we all have horrible stories, and we are all touched by it. And so when we talk about public transport, when we talk about new mobility, they are all inherent, and safety cannot be an afterthought, as many times is. So that's where we're really moving forward.
We have the technology needed in order to help policymakers create a safer environment for streets, says Paulo Humanes. How close is the cooperation at the end of the day with policymakers that you're encountering? Share with us your experience.
Well, for us, I think the ITF and the Corporate Partnership Board in particular provided a fantastic platform that enabled us to really understand this, because many times, and I understand this entirely, there's very much the reaction of, well, we don't necessarily want to speak to the private sector, or we don't want to understand because we might be giving them an unfair competitive advantage and so on. But also, we are now seeing that there is a movement towards, as I say, share some of the information, because we realize that countries, cities will need the tools to enable them to deliver that policy. That's what we want to do.
Andrew McCullough, something that you concur with?
Well, very much so. I think that this is an important aspect of how we move forward. And one of the things that I would point to from within our network is that substance, that having this sort of empirical evidence is an important part of the advocacy process and ultimately in assisting, be it cities or national governments, to design good policies that will deliver better outcomes for their citizens. So I think, if I can point to the sort of past experience where we've had initiatives like the NCAP network, so where you're assessing the safety performance of new cars, that's a very powerful tool that helps drive safety back to vehicle manufacturers. Something like the IRAP network, the International Road Assessment Program, something again where our member clubs are very strongly using that sort of data, where you're able to go out and assess the safety of the road network, and then use that back to policymakers to show where the most effective improvements can be made. And I think there's a role here for Paolo and his company, and possibly for similar providers who have this sort of analytical capability to show to the decision makers, and also to be used in the advocacy process, what are the improvements that we can make? How can we address congestion in some of these major cities? What are the changes that we can make to the design of the transport network? What are the impacts going to be on air quality and so on? So I think if you've got that sort of tool available, then I think it can be powerful to the decision makers, but also to the advocates.
Paolo, we heard from policymakers, obviously, we heard from ministers. Was there anything that you heard that struck you, that surprised you?
No, but there was one thing in particular that I think it's worthwhile as opening and talking about, which was the issue of data. I do entirely agree that data is essential in what we want to do, but I have to say that in many of the developing countries, a lot of times it's an excuse not to actually take action, and I think that's something that it's difficult, and we have to overcome that. And of course, I as a technology provider, we work on technology exactly to use some of forecasting methods or algorithms to do some intelligent understanding of what's going on. But we also need to take in consideration that there are other sources of maybe data that we don't necessarily associate with road safety that we can also use. It's important to understand that even the data that we have, even in developed countries, sometimes it's biased, and we need to take that in consideration. I mean, personally, I had a road bike accident about 3 years ago, and I slid on the tram lines, and I was in hospital and out of work for 3 months, and that was not registered as a road crash here in Germany because of the situation and how it happens. So you have to understand that sometimes the data is biased because police has other ways or other priorities rather than to register, and we need to consider that some technology can help us understand, and it can come from different sources. So we all have mobile phones, so we have an idea where we travel, how things happen. So we need to make better use of the data that we have, I totally agree, but also not use data as an excuse not to do anything. There's best practices that we can do, and we can identify ways to do things, because every little thing in the end will make a big difference.
Andrew, the data is biased, says Paolo. Something you'd like to add to that particular point?
Well, I think he's certainly got the expertise in that area. I think what's good here is that we increasingly have the technology to look at, to understand what is happening in real time, and I think when you have that capability, you can really see what's occurring. So it plays the quality of the data plays a very important role, and being able to get that to decision makers and to advocates, I think, is going to fundamentally change what we can do in the future. From my point of view, as an advocate, I think what it gives us the capability to do with our advocacy is move beyond spin and into substance, and I think that's absolutely a fundamentally important part of the process.
Andrew McKellar and Paolo Humanis, many thanks for your input and your outlook. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, all 7 speakers that you've heard are still here, and they're happy to take your questions about anything you've heard here up until now, anything you would like to contest, anything that you would like to add on. This is your time before we wrap up this year's ITF, so this is your final and last opportunity to chime in, contribute with a question. First question goes to the gentleman all the way in the back. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Salvador. I'm coming from Mexico. My questions to the presenters is about delivery of goods. Every time I hear about improving mobility in the city, I hear persons, I hear cars, I hear public service, I see bicycles, and I see pedestrians, but I don't hear about goods delivery. And it's very often that you redo the street, you reconstruct, you put new lanes for cycles, but you don't reserve spaces for delivery. So what is the plan?
Is there anyone in particular you would like to address this question, or
any of the mayors?
Anyone from our speakers would like to take this up? Michael, perhaps the microphone is coming to you. Right there.
Yes. This is a tension, I think, in every city that is struggling with growth and traffic problems and trying to balance the demands for the curb and for street space. In New York City, we're wrestling with this right now as part of our congestion policy, where we are developing a new citywide freight plan simultaneously with developing a strategy for reducing congestion, especially in the Manhattan core. And so we've taken away some of the loading spaces and along the curb in some of the most congested parts of Manhattan to give a little more space for traffic to move. At the same time, we're trying to allocate more truck loading spaces in other areas and trying to better control the use and abuse of municipal placards, where often municipal vehicles are taking up parking spaces that would otherwise be used by trucks for loading and unloading. We're looking at ways of rebalancing our rules around double parking in ways that will help facilitate better traffic flow. But it's a very big challenge for cities across the world. I think ultimately over the next several years, as we move towards license plate-based recognition, parking enforcement and management systems, we'll be changing all of our paper placards for municipal vehicles into electronic placards tied to the license plate, which will then enable us to move to license plate-based enforcement, so traffic police officers giving traffic tickets will be able to do so in a much more efficient fashion, in a much fairer fashion, and to enforce against all the vehicles that are violating our curb rules. That in and of itself will free up more space for trucks to get to the curb, but we need a continuing dialogue with the industry to make effective curb management policy.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for taking that question. Please, Miguel wanted to add on that. Let me just hand over the microphone to you.
Well, just very quickly, I have a personal perspective on it. It's that as a politicians, we are usually closer to the passenger mobility aspect for maybe 2 reasons. And if you allow me to be a bit informal, box don't vote, people vote. And that would be one reason. And the second reason is that the public sector, public transport, is much more regulated with much more public intervention than the logistics sector, which is highly private and highly vertical activities. I think what's happening, and to be completely honest with you, will fail all targets of the Paris Agreement if we don't deal with urban logistics. So it's that important. And I think that what's changing is that you are bringing, for instance, the ITF recently created a corporate board where companies come closer to the politicians. And in Lisbon, we are now acting on a campaign to attack the curbside. And for the first time in history, we have all the logistic guys on board, and we have the auto club on board, because people understand that it's no longer about letting cars moving. It's about protect the city of the abuse of anyone, including cars. And people are changing minds, and even the industry is understanding that. And you are absolutely right. There will be no successful successful mobility policy if it doesn't deal with freight, with urban logistics, and it's something that we have to be better in working on that. Right. Just a final number, 60% of the main road in Lisbon, urban road, the key road, the most valuable road in Lisbon, 60% it's urban freight. Right. So that's how important it is in Lisbon.
Right, thank you, Miguel. The gentleman had his hand up first. Yes, you get the microphone. Please.
Yeah, I'm George Yannis from the Technical University of Athens. In safety, very often we see where the data are and not where the problems are, and this is a main problem for cities. We miss exposure data for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. We miss performance indicators about how much pedestrians are using their mobile phone, how much is speeding of cyclists, how much motorcyclists are under the influence of alcohol. And we claim that higher share of public transport is a great road safety measure, but we don't have the data. And the question is, how far are we going to work more seriously on data to substantiate our decisions on road safety at cities?
All right, thank you so much. Who of our speakers would like to address this question, please? Minister Hout.
Thank you. I think that every time it's easier to have real-time data. In public transport, for example, if you have an automatic ticketing, you know the trip pattern. You also have GPS in trucks, and so there are many possibilities of getting that information. We are working with the mobile phone companies and using the track of the mobile phones. We have 17 million persons in the country and 24 million cellular phones. So everyone has a phone. And that allows to follow the trips and to keep information about the patterns and to even to segment, because of the speed and the trip pattern and the time, how they behave. So I think that collecting data is much easier now than ever.
All right, thank you so much. We got two more questions from this side, the gentleman all the way in the back, and then the gentleman in the second row afterwards. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stoichos Stamenkovski from Macedonia, President of National Road Safety Council in Macedonia. First of all, thank you for a great speech to all of the speakers. I have one maybe complicated question. I want to ask one of the speakers what they think. Is there any secret formula for increasing the road safety and decreasing the road fatalities? I think what is their opinion is what is most important. Does the good policy is the most important? Maybe the increasing the operational capacities, administrative capacities, because we have a lot of examples and a lot of country which has a lot of money and good administrative capacities, but they still have problem with increasing number of road fatalities on the roads. So the question is, what's the most important, good policies or good administrative or operational capacities? And the question is for the one of the ministries here in the first row.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Nothing less than the secret formula here is asked for success, ladies and gentlemen. Well, somebody's got it. Anne got the secret formula.
Oh, I don't know if I have the secret formula, but I just think that you do have to focus, as I said, on the 3 E's, which is education, enforcement, and engineering. But I suppose, as I think some of the speakers said before, really enforcement seems to be the way that people respond, you know, in terms of changing their behavior. So, and that can be expensive to put in place, the level of enforcement that might be needed, but the benefits that you seem to get is quite significant. So I come from an engineering background, so I obviously always tend try and focus on the engineering, let's just fix the roads, but you really do have to also consider enforcement. But behind that, you're going to have to change people's attitudes, and that needs education. So it's the 3 E's, but I think you have to focus on them all. But unfortunately, enforcement seems to get the greatest return.
And I think some of the ingredients needed for a successful strategy were clearly played out here and discussed and laid out by our speakers. The gentleman here in the second row, I haven't forgotten the other ones. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Patrick Maléjac, Secretary General of the World Association. 2 remarks that lead to a question. We know that planning for safe roads is better than correcting roads that have already been built that turn out to be unsafe. That's safety audits versus safety inspections and all that. The second remark is that we know that the rate of urbanization is increasing. This means that urban settlements now that are quite informal will more and more be formal over the years. And as my question, how do we ensure that urbanization comes with future-proofing in terms of road safety? How do we ensure that streets that are more or less roads now and will turn into streets 5 years, 10 years from now, how do we ensure as much as we can that they are now built to be safe? That will be cheaper and more efficient than then trying to make them safer once we have hundreds or thousands of people living by what were roads and now are streets. Thank you. That's a question for any of the distinguished speakers, of course.
Right, thank you. I have a feeling Michael has a thing or two to say about that. Michael, you want to take that?
Well, I think it points to the need for rapid capacity building and better training. We have engineers across the world who were trained to build roads, to move cars and trucks faster, but with relatively little regard for vulnerable road users. We need to invert that pyramid and focus fundamentally on how to create safe systems for mobility and access across the world, and particularly focusing on the most rapidly urbanizing parts of the world. And that means finding ways to take to scale these new ways of thinking about road design, new ways of thinking about traffic safety enforcement culture and traffic safety education for drivers. We need to have good motor vehicle registry systems established in countries across the world so that automated enforcement systems can be used, because these are much cheaper, more efficient, and less vulnerable to corruption. We need to find ways of ensuring that finance institutions pay attention to safety and sustainability impacts of investments that they are making and approving, so that instead of blindly financing infrastructure simply to move goods faster, we're also building in sustainability and safety goals.
All right, thank you, Michael. We have the lady all the way in the back. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Jan Tomakova is my name. I'm working for GIZ, German Cooperation, in Liberia, and I am working in road safety issues. What I realized that road safety issue here in developing countries was not addressed too much, or was addressed, but the leaders of developing countries were not represented too much. But maybe one of the solutions for these problems of 90% of road casualties and fatalities in developing countries could be addressed in the way of partnerships, city partnerships with cities in, for example, African countries like Liberia, and maybe because there are so many mayors here or like representatives of the cities, maybe they would like to express their interest in cooperation with Monrovia, for example, that we could facilitate the connection. Because there is a lot of knowledge in OECD countries, but unfortunately this knowledge is not yet implemented very well in countries like Liberia. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw a lot of nodding heads here while you were speaking, so obviously your point is very well taken and certainly being taken into account here. So thank you for your input. The lady right next, and then the gentleman who has the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Dagmar Köhler. I work for Polis, a network of cities and regions. So we've heard a couple of times that safer city streets require a more sustainable transport system. So however, a more sustainable system requires change, and people do not like change so much. At the same time, elected politicians need to be liked by the people. So does that mean we'll have to wait for the collapse of our cities before we'll witness change? Do we have to continue to wait for the fatal accidents to happen before a spot is marked on a map in order to have a change on an intersection, for example? So what can be done to break this cycle?
What can be done today? Julie, you want to take this one?
Point taken. What I can say is that effective civil society organization, campaigning and lobbying can make a difference politically and help support the politicians to make the right decisions. So for a long time in Auckland, we had a really organized road lobby who was very effective at getting the majority of the funding into a few motorways. But in recent years, we had a number of civil society groups that were just volunteer groups who do amazing work. One is a blog. It started as Auckland Transport Blog, became Greater Auckland, and they were doing a lot of reporting in depth on transport issues that the mainstream media never would have gotten into because the journalists don't have that specialization. And that was very, very popular. And then we had a climate youth group called Generation Zero, who started very effectively organizing and mobilizing youth to submit on city planning rule changes, to organize for local body elections. Often young people don't vote in local body elections, and even in central government. So that civil society movement was absolutely critical in both building the public support for the change in politicians and policies and the change in transport policy across the board. So you get more public buy-in or a sort of change across parties as well as getting a change in who is in power that will support these sorts of changes in the short term.
All right, thank you, Julie. We got time for a couple more questions. The gentleman has the back. Minister, I haven't overlooked you. You'll be last. I'll give you the last word. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Christian Rackluch from the Austrian Ministry of Transport. We have heard a lot of transport safety, Vision Zero, and so on, with the ultimate objective of preserving lives, of course, preventing fatalities, and also increasing quality of life in European cities. However, there is a much bigger proportion of what I would call transport-related fatalities, which is not so much addressed here. Noxious emissions from PM, NOx, and so on. And my question is to know, when will we come to a Vision Zero for these externalities who finally cause much more victims than traffic accidents, actually? Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Does anyone feel like they want to address this one? Michael?
I think there's a growing awareness across the world that we need to integrate public health officials and public health policy into transport policy and urban economic development policy. And groups like the World Health Organization, Bloomberg School of Public Health, and a growing number of traffic safety organizations and environmental agencies in different countries, I think, are recognizing these links that sustainable transport policies often co-align across improving traffic safety, reduces air pollution, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, increases physical activity, and all of these can contribute to improved public health. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us in this room to keep those linkages in mind. And as we go about working in our organizations, public sector and private sector, contemplate ways that we can better quantify these co-benefits of different interventions rather than thinking in silos, so that we can use new data tools and better analytics to evaluate the economic case for how these sustainable transport interventions make good economic policy and produce better societies that are more healthy and that in fact have higher economic productivity, that simply driving towards more mobility is actually sub-optimizing economic performance.
Right. I know that some of us, perhaps most of us, have flights to catch, have trains to catch. So I apologize to those who have raised their hands. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. But the Minister of Transportation Minister of South Africa, I give you the last word. Please make it brief.
Thank you. I'm going to be very brief. I know we're talking about safer cities, but I would have liked to have known maybe from my colleague from Chile. Because one of the pressing issues in developing countries is trying to slow down urbanization, because the infrastructure is just not up to scratch. And also, the Undersecretary of the US spoke about the rise in road fatalities in rural areas. So maybe is there any connection on safer cities and also the necessity to develop roads as means of local economic development to try and keep many people in the rural areas? The last point, maybe Michael can talk about this. One of the things I didn't have a chance to say is that in South Africa, we still have a problem that we've not changed the apartheid settlement patterns. White South Africans still live in the suburbs, in the center of the cities, and the majority of black people, which are workers, are staying far away. So I don't know whether maybe New York, experience of New York, how transport can also be used as a means of creating racially integrated cities as one of the challenges, for instance, that you might have looked at. So it's to my two colleagues, maybe.
Please.
Thank you.
The two colleagues are being addressed.
The minister from Chile.
Who seems rather hesitant to take this
okay.
one. But,
anyone.
It's no pressure here. Anyone who wants to address that, Minister Hood, you wanna bring this to a close?
I think I will. I can answer part of the mention regarding urbanization and how dense cities. Our view is that increase in density, in urban density, is a fact that will continue to happen. And people locate in the center of the city every time more because of the time saving, and it's more convenient. So we think that will push the use of the streets by pedestrians. So I think it's a good result.
Right.
And about connectivity and the location in the outskirts of cities is really expensive for the government, because providing public transport is very expensive, very difficult, and people waste lots of time. So we are in favor of allowing the free decision of location of everyone, but the tendency by itself is to more dense cities.
Michael, bring it home.
Yes, I guess I would argue that we need to pursue both of the Sustainable Development Goals that refer to enhanced access for all people in rural areas, as well as improving our mobility system and its equity in urban areas and developing sustainable urban development patterns. I would argue, in fact, that urbanization is a pathway towards safer cities, towards safer mobility systems, because they tend to produce higher incomes, which enable us to invest in creating a safe and equitable living environment. As to the question of inequality and segregation in cities, this is a terribly difficult problem, and the transport sector alone can't bear that burden. But we do need to very closely integrate transport policies, housing policies, and economic development policies to ensure more equity of access to jobs, to opportunities, to education. In New York City, we have a One NYC vision that's been put forward by Mayor Bill de Blasio, which builds on Mayor Bloomberg's sustainability vision in Plan YC and seeks to increase the affordable housing supply and to increase access of all New Yorkers to job opportunities across the city. These are very big, challenging problems, and we're making some progress and have a long way to go.
Still a long way to go. Thank you. Keep that microphone, Michael, because that was indeed the last word, the last input that we have received. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the closing plenary titled Working Together for Safer City Streets. And I think I speak for all when I say this has been a session very rich in input, very rich in strategies and also in suggestions as to how to move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up one more time for our 7 speakers. Thank you so much. This year's ITF presidency, of course, was held by Latvia, so it's only fitting that the State Secretary for Transport of Latvia, Kaspars Osolins, will now address the audience to close this all up. Mr. State Secretary.
Your Excellencies, Ministers, Heads of Delegations, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and privilege for me to address you on behalf of the ITF presidency once again. Back in 2015, when Latvia was chosen to become ITF's presiding country for this year, we knew that it will be a long way filled with hard work. Nonetheless, we accepted our new role with passion, seriousness, and openness. And I think after all these months, we are on the right path toward great achievements. In this year's summit, we had a meaningful dialogue and valuable discussions on safety and security in transport. We adopted the Declaration on Safety and Security in Transport, including aspects of safety for sustainable and inclusive road and rail transport, security of passenger transport, safe, secure, and resilient transport systems, innovation and new technologies for a safer and more secure transport. We reached a compromise and adopted the statement from ministers of European member countries on the implementation of the Quality Charter and further steps for quota development. I believe we will put all our best efforts into achieving all the above-mentioned goals. We are going to continue development of more secure, safe, efficient, and connected transport systems, fostering innovations and green transport solutions despite growing demand for transport services. I would like to thank you all for support for the Latvian presidency of the International Transport Forum. To say the least, it was great honor and joy for us to be the presiding country of International Transport Forum. I'm confident that Republic of Korea will do an amazing job of keeping up the good work. I would like to thank you again for being with us in the ITF Summit of 2018 under the presidency of Latvia. See you all next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much to State Secretary Kaspars Osolins, and congratulations on a successful presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, now to finally wrap up and close a very successful ITF, it's my pleasure to yield the floor to a gentleman who called himself a freshman last night. But I tell you, it's a pretty good freshman year, if you ask me. It's a pretty good start for the Secretary General of the ITF. Young, take him, ladies and gentlemen.
I would like to call you friends, because we spent a 3-day passionate journey together, and we shared a lot of things and a lot of information, a lot of experience, and I think it was all meaningful. Because this was my first official summit, so I was really a little bit nervous and paying attention to every moment that I spent with you. And I'm really happy that now everything is going to an end without any problem. In German, I would like to say, "Ende gut, alles gut." Thank you very much. Above all, thanks go to the team Latvia, of course, in the first place, led by Minister Uldis Augulis, for the impeccable way in which Latvia has steered the ITF over the past 1 year, and during this summit as well. So I really thank you from the bottom of my heart, especially State Secretary Ozo Lynch who steered the ministerial meeting so well and also deserves our sincere gratitude and appreciation. And I cannot go on without mentioning Anna Novikova, our Latvian TMB member, ably chaired the TMB meeting, which was not easy all the time, and led our member countries' summit preparation perfectly. So thank you again. And I would like to thank our sponsors, Bombardier, who supported the 2015 summit and now back as Diamond sponsor. Bombardier was present in many ways, but the networking, even for women in transport, deserves special mention. And we are so pleased to have had DECRA at the summit as our gold sponsor. Their long-standing commitment to road safety and Vision Zero made DECRA a must-have partner. So we're really happy about that. And Free State of Saxony as our regional partner, and City of Leipzig as well. And Minister Dulig in particular have supported us in the most generous way. We will not forget the acrobats last night. And the team, Congress Center Leipzig, led by Mr. Geisenberger, and Andre Kaldenhoff was fantastic as ever. CCL team as well. And thanks also go to all partners who enriched the summit with side events, fantastic exposition stands, with very impressive live demonstrations. To them I can say, come again next year. Then there is my own team in the ITF Secretariat. They really worked hard, and much harder than I myself, so I really thank them for great success of this summit. During the past several days, I was greeted by so many people, and they gave me positive feedbacks, but I don't think I was the only person who was congratulated and thanked. And it's one of you who is present at the moment with me, and we all make our own history. I think we are in the process of making an ITF history because Secretariat is a part of it. We are leading, we are helping, we are supporting. It's you and we all together are making our own history. So I think we should not forget about that. And especially congratulations on New York City for Achievement Award. And I knew that there are several heroes like Iron Man and Spider-Man who saves lives in New York. But I realized that people like us, ordinary people like us, Michael and myself, could save lives as well when we go out with more determinations and more insights for the future. So we can work together through this efficient platform of ITF. And also, as I mentioned, that we count on you for giving me a lot of feedbacks and ideas, because without your help and support, we cannot be perfect. So we are still going together to finalize all those questions raised and to have some more dimensions of reflections on each the question. So we will make a great success altogether. But we know that Rome was not built in a day, so we can continue. So now, officially, the summit is over, and next year, I will be a sophomore, so I will try my best to make it better, but I'm afraid that this summit was so perfect, so I feel more responsible, and I know that my staff members will help, and you also will help me as well. Thank you again. Please mark the 22nd to 24th of May 2019 in your agenda, so we will meet again in Leipzig. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Secretary General Yang Tae Kim, and congratulations on a successful freshman year, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you back next year, of course. I think we speak for all you when I say this has been very productive ITF 2018. And let's give it up one more time for the entire staff and the team that made it all happen. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all safe travels. We talked so much about travels and about safety in travel. So have a great trip back home, and see you all back here next year. Looking forward to it, and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.